Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Right.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello everyone, this is DJ and the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. Strixhaven has a ton of fun legendary creatures and my eye has been caught by a Mardu human warlock. It's Extus Oriq Overlord. And this is no ordinary legend. On the backside is a sorcery Awaken the Blood Avatar. Let's take a look at this MDF commander. Extus Oriq Overlord is 1 white, black for a 2/4 legendary human warlock with double strike. Extus also has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So some creature recursion if we're casting spells, awesome. On the backside, we have a crazy sorcery. 6 black-red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, create a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token with haste, and whenever this creature attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. I love the flexibility of this commander. On the front side, you can just cast spells and start raising dead and rebuilding after a board wipe or when you just throw stuff into the graveyard. On the sorcery side, you can sack your board, get those creatures in the graveyard, but cast a really powerful sorcery for incredibly cheap. Just 3 creatures and a black and a red can get you an edict and a 3/6 that just bolts everyone. You know, Awaken the Blood Avatar is so powerful, I believe that you can sacrifice 3 and then 4 and then 5 creatures to cast this over and over and over again, generating an army of 3/6 avatars that deal tons of damage to the board, sacrifice everything as you create your own Overlord army. I'm excited. Let's take a look at how to put this deck together. If we're going to be sacrificing creatures, we need to make creatures. Specifically creatures we don't mind sacrificing. Monastery Mentor and Sedgemoor Witch, these are all stars. We're going to want a certain amount of non-creature or instant and sorcery spells in our deck, and these will generate extra 1/1s that we can sacrifice. These will do a great job of going wide as we just play our normal game. Teysa Auras of Scion, Pawn of Ulamog, Elenda the Dusk Rose, all of these will generate a bunch of tokens when things die. We have some recursion on the front side of our commander, a sacrifice on the back side of our commander, so death triggers could be a really powerful synergy. Hey Teysa, why don't you bring along... Yeah, there she is, Teysa Karlov, get in here. We can also use some spells to create tokens too. I like Rise of the Dead Marn because things are going to be dying all over the place, and this can refill our board for really cheap so we can continue sacrificing creatures. I also like Secure the Wastes because this can happen at instant speed. Out of nowhere, you fill your board, and then suddenly you can go off with all this cool sacrificing. If you're interested in Strixhaven, Blot Out the Sky is a fun inclusion. I'm a little bit down on sorcery speed though. Of course, we have a sack outlet on our commander on that sorcery side, but I have a few other sacrifice outlets that I love. Yawgmoth Ran Physician, it draws us a card when we sacrifice creatures. Phyrexian Altar, it gives us mana when we sacrifice creatures. God Eternal Bontu, you sacrifice creatures and draw us cards. That's what we need in this kind of deck, is to be able to churn through creatures to draw extra cards that'll get us into those spells. And remember, these creatures can just come right back. It's not just our commander that has recursion. There's a whole recursion package built into this deck. But you know, as long as we're sacrificing a bunch of stuff and as long as there are all these death triggers going off, let's just throw in a Blood Artist, a Cruel Celebrant, a Mayhem Devil, a Zulport Cutthroat, maybe a Falcon Wrath Noble, just to, you know, round it out and slowly drain your opponents to death. These are the payoff cards for building an engine. They're going to pay off over time as we slowly drain out our opponents. And remember, they're creatures that we can sacrifice for value and get back. Speaking of getting creatures back, let's talk about our recursion packages. There are a few cards that get creatures back pretty reliably. Joffrey Ghostforge is straight out of the new set, and it can do a thing where it just kind of brings back a token in a spirit form. It's pretty cool. Luminous Broodmoth brings things back with flying. Jared Weatherlight Hero can just do a one-off effect where it brings everything back. Athreo's Shroud Veiled can put a coin counter on things. But basically, it's an insurance policy that that creature will return if it dies. Sun Titan gets back a ton of stuff, our mana base, some of our mana rocks, a lot of our payoff sort of sacrifice pingers, but not a lot of the other recursion pieces. We can actually loop some of our other recursion pieces. We have Revelark and Karmic Guide in here together that can loop with the Sac Outlet and sort of combo each other out. Or there's just the classic Phyrexian Delver that just brings another creature back. In fact, bringing creatures back is so valuable, we have a whole set of non-creatures that do it. Phyrexian Reclamation is an enchantment. We can just do it over and over again. Victimize, sacrifice a creature, bring 2 back. It's basically what we want to do. Reanimate is so cheap, it's a one-off effect. And then Command the Dreadhorde is just a big splashy effect that gets everything back. So we can rebuild our entire Aristocrats package from scratch. You know, I really like the deck building constraint around Extus because you want a creature in your graveyard, but then you have to cast an instant or sorcery. So you can't just pack your deck full of one type or another. You kind of have to have a good balance. And one thing that's interesting that I've decided to go down with this deck is that I've actually gone way creature heavy. In fact, there's about 35 creatures in this deck. Now you might think you're never going to get all those back because there aren't enough instants and sorceries to trigger them, you know, much less your Monastery Mentor and things like that. But that's why I've decided to go down the route of MDFCs, the multi-dual faced cards. And so I have a question. How many is too many? Because I have packed them in here. They are lands that in the late game, when you don't need them as lands, they have a minor effect. But with your commander out, they also return a creature to your hand, which actually makes their effect pretty powerful. I love Malakir Rebirth, just in general. Hoggermawling's a good removal spell. Agadeem's Awakening, again, that recursion effect. So all of those are just slam dunk conclusions. But what about Palaka Predation or Zoff's Consumption? If you tack on a sort of Raise Dead effect to this spell, if you assume your commander's out, like, are they worth running? I don't know. I'm going to test them out. Same thing, Kazul's Fury. It's a sack outlet that deals damage. Perfect. Valakut Awakening. Awesome card advantage. It stinks that we have to put them on the bottom of our library, but you know, whatever. Shattercoal Smashing. That's just a great card that kills what you need to have killed. But Spikefield Hazard? Yeah. Sajiri's Shelter, onto Inversion, Amiria's Call seems solid, but what about the Takedown? You know, just an instant speed damage based removal spell. Or this McKindy Stampede, like, is a sorcery speed 5 mana pump good in this deck? I don't know. I really don't, but I like the idea of the flexibility of these, of having them trigger Extus if we need to, but most of the time in my mind, having them be lands. That's the power of MDFCs. So I'm really pushing the power level of them to see how it works. That does mean that there are a lot of tapped lands in here. That means that almost every other part of the mana base is an untapped land. And it does mean that the mana base does get a little bit expensive to try to have all of those other lands become untapped. But that's kind of the deck. You have Aristocrat synergies, you build these engines up, and you either use Extus to rebuild or you use Awaken the Blood Avatar as a cool sacrifice outlet. I'm just super pumped. So how does the playstyle of this deck actually come to fruition? Well, the first thing is that you got to ramp, because in a lot of these situations, you need a lot of mana. You know, Awaken the Blood Avatar is not a cheap spell. You can't just sacrifice a bajillion creatures. So you got to make your land drop. So if you have a card like Zoff's Consumption, don't be afraid to just make that land drop. It's probably not going to pay off in the late game. But one thing that's really great is there are a lot of value creatures at the 2 and 3 mana slot, which means that you're going to have a board presence early. You can start making tokens. You can start drawing cards. There's a lot of treasure makers in here too. And then as soon as you have this beginnings of an engine, you can start protecting it. Selfless Glyph Weaver gives you board protection. Jared, people don't want to board wipe if you're immediately going to get everything back. And then you can decide where you're going to go. Are there a bunch of creatures in your graveyard? Do you want to drop Extus and play, you know, random dorky instants and sorceries like that Spikefield Hazard or a Ransack the Lab to rebuild your board and get things back so you can cast them out? Or maybe you've established these payoff cards like a Corpse Knight or a Zulaport Cutthroat, so then you can finally cast Awaken the Blood Avatar, sacrifice a bunch of things, deal a bunch of damage, have your opponent sacrifice stuff, you swing in, deal a bunch of damage. It's so cool. You know, This is a very cool spell and a very powerful token, which has me thinking there's a lot of different ways to build this deck. In fact, you could go the token route. The one thing I'd like to do is Anointed Procession. Copy that token. Get 2 of them. It's such a powerful spell. And I mean, as long as you're going token tribal, there's a lot of tokens already built into this deck. You could Perforos, God of the Forge. You know, just imagine the young pyromancers out there and the sage witches and all this other stuff to be able to create all these tokens, and you're dealing damage with Perforos, and that just pressures your opponents even more with those few key Zulaport Cutthroat triggers or whatever. Thales Reverent Medium can sort of help with that strategy too. And going wide with a ton of tokens would be really good for your Aristocrat strategy. Of course, you could go in another direction too. You could be more spells matter. I mentioned how cool this sorcery is. Wouldn't it be great to double it up with a fork or a dual caster mage? Actually, I want to double it up with a card called Fury Storm, because you end up casting your commander a ton in this game. And so then Fury Storm will copy that crazy sorcery over and over and over again, leaving you with an army of 3/6s. And just imagine if you have Anointed Procession out, just imagine if you have Perforos and all this other stuff. Oh my gosh, there's so many cards that I want in this deck. It's going to be impossible for any of us to trim it down to a great 99, but trust me, this deck is going to be awesome, and there's going to be so much tinkering involved. I think you're going to love it. I want to thank the sponsor of the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, Cool Stuff Inc. They have a new Commander HQ. There's deck lists and strategy for all sorts of different stuff. Right here is Kaldheim in front of me right now, but they're updating it for Strixhaven, so that is the place to go to get a bunch of cool deck lists. I also want to thank my patrons. They're amazing. They support me every day. And I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for watching me on the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. If you like this stuff, please consider subscribing. You can also find me over on the Command Zone. I don't need to plug the Command Zone. Anyways, hopefully you enjoy my content on all of the channels that I'm on, and I cannot wait to make more deck decks. I'll see y'all really soon. Bye-bye.